Thank you very much to everybody who was recognized tonight. Our next item on the agenda are committee reports. We have two that are written reports, the Court Committee and the Academic Advisory Committee. And our next one is our legislative update from Mr. Watt. How are you doing, Mr. Shaw? Thank you very much.
Can you hear me?
All yours.
Okay. Thank you very much. Good evening to the school board members and the superintendent from a very frigid Tallahassee right now. For those of you who traveled up there last week, be glad it was last week and not tonight. It is currently a balmy 22 degrees out. So for going on for this week, we had a somewhat quiet week so far. A couple of interesting items that came up yesterday. One is within actually the Hurricane Irma special committee that they created to sort of take a look at what the response was from the state. They've spent months looking at this. They've finally put their recommendations together. And something that would impact the district is one of the recommendations is having at any hardened facility and shelter generators ready to go for the storm. The one positive thing that they did within that recommendation is that they said that the state would need to provide the funding to get those generators set up at the different facilities. So while it would be something that the district would have to probably maintain, the initial cost to purchase and install would be paid for by the state. The other item that came up yesterday in the Senate Education Committee, it's a conversation. I know there's been some interest from board members with regards to computer programming. And there was a bill where it was initially dealing with just computer programming by Senator Pasadomo. She did a strike all to the bill and basically expanded the concept to be computer sciences. So not just looking at coding, but looking at all the different aspects of computer technology, implementation, starting off in elementary school, providing it, I believe, over the next couple of years, about 10% of the district-wide schools, and then trying to provide in increments for the next 2 to 3 years, and then on the high school level, being able to create the coding programs to potentially use as a foreign language instead of the traditional Spanish, French, some of those things. Today, there were 2 bills of real interest that came up in the House Pre-K-12 Quality Committee. One is HB 1279, and it's something that I know has been brought up throughout the state. It deals with school district accountability. They're looking at all different types of areas of where it's dealing with either the Auditor General, what's allowed by the school board members. One of the parts that would that got some heartburn from people is that you would have to do a individual board agenda item for any potential travel by a school board member for any kind of district work. So if you're going to a conference, anything, you would have to, prior to going to that conference, do a line-by-line item as basically as your approval to be able to go on that trip on behalf of the district. One of the other parts of that is within the bill, it stated that for school board members, the salary would either be $44,000 at the most, or whatever the current starting salary is of a new teacher, whichever was less. It's something that in later discussions in our FEL group, we're trying to figure out is it may be something as a negotiation tool further down the road of saying we're going to set the salaries and some of that and give up some of the other areas. But again, we're not quite sure where they're going because they've been very quiet on a lot of this. I will say the House sponsor, Jennifer Sullivan, made it very clear she is open to talking with members, stakeholders about some concerns, making some changes. but how much of that is going to be allowed is something I think that ultimately is going to be driven top down from the speaker. The other bill of note that came out in committee was by Representative Fisher, and that is dealing with the school board members being able to have no more than 8 consecutive years on the board. There was a lot of conversation within that bill discussion. Initially, there was thought that the bill was going to die in that committee. There was many of them said they would rather see potentially 12 years. Why do we even need to do this at all? Ultimately, the bill did pass. Within that, though, it is retroactive within the language, which goes back to 2013. So effectively, you come into office in 2014. That would be considered your first term. So then if you are then elected now, any other time, that would be your second term. So potentially by 2022, you would be out of office. You would have to sit out a term, and then if you chose, you could run again. But you would only be allowed those 8 consecutive years. Within that, I will give credit, one of our delegation members, I believe he might have been the only no vote on that bill, was Representative Rick Roth. He said he was very conflicted. He believes in the idea of term limits. However, he did not like the way this was worded. He just said he had a lot of concern. So he was the actual only no vote for that bill. Coming up tomorrow within the House Education Committee, there's a bill by another member of our delegation, Representative Silvers, that is creating some alternative pathways for graduation. If you have a certain DOE-approved apprenticeship or pre-apprenticeship and you complete that, you can apply that towards some of your credits, such as your speech and debate, some of your fine arts, things of that nature. It would allow you to say, hey, I did this instead, and get you out with a regular diploma. The other item of interest is they're going to do a workshop and on potential language for oversight and monitoring scholarship programs. This is where we're expecting to see a little more on what they want to do with the Hope scholarships, what their potential negotiations are going to go on with the Senate. So it's something long-term. This will probably be the beginning of what we see for the Hope Scholarship, what the final language is going to be. If they're going to do full vouchers, what else they may tack on to the bill, simply because there's not much moving on any particular committee, whether it's transportation, it's commerce. There's a lot of what would be normally package bills. They're non-existent this year, so they're only having a select few bills that will become train bills, and this will likely be the education train bill that they're going to tack everything on and then try to negotiate in the final week of session. So tomorrow it's going to be very interesting to get an idea with that. The next thing is on Friday there is a Constitutional Revision Commission education meeting. Within that, they are planning to bring back the proposal that would eliminate salaries for school board members. They are also bringing up the language that says basically there is nothing that can be construed to make sure a child gets quality education in the state. The way the language is written, it would indicate that potentially this is another avenue they are looking at for trying to create a voucher program, because it is so broad and it doesn't state what the limitations are. They can say a voucher program is something that we view as a way to provide some students quality education and then open up that way. The other two other proposals are dealing with high-performance districts being able to become charter districts. And then also it's proposal number 4, it's a Declaration of Rights of Religious Freedom, which would repeal the Blaine Amendment, which then opens up funding for religious school, public funding of religious schools at that point. part of the discussions going on around Tallahassee right now is because there are bills that are almost identical to some of these proposals. It's a wait and see of if the legislature can't pass some of these bills, then they will go through the CRC. Also, there's negotiations going on, although nobody will admit to it, between members of the CRC and leadership both on the House and Senate side of trying to say, hey, we'll pass these certain proposals because they know they can only probably put maybe 6 total proposals on the ballot before it becomes too burdensome, and then they'll have an issue of not being able to pass everything that they want. So they're looking at if we can get it passed this way, then we'll take it off a proposal. Or if they say, we know we're not going to be able to get it through the commission, then they'll find a way to tack it on somewhere over in the legislative side. So over the next couple of weeks, we're going to start seeing more coming out from the CRC now that the legislature is in session. So it's going to be a cat and mouse game of just watching what one does and how the other one reacts to sort of see where we're going in the foreseeable future of the next month or so when they really have to clamp down on what the legislature is planning to do for this session. With that, I will be glad to take any questions.
Thank you. Mrs. Brill?
Thank you. And I have 2 things for you, Andrew. First is, because it was hard to hear, has there been any movement on the bills having to do with teacher evaluations and, eliminating it based on VAM scores, et cetera, and going back to allowing years of service and higher level degrees and things like that? Has there been any action on that?
There has been no action, but there is discussion that may be part of the workshop tomorrow because we're expecting this to be a very broad bill that eventually they come out with based off of this discussion. You may see some of that as we'll put in some things dealing with VAM and how we evaluate as a trade-off for opening up the Hope scholarships. So it would be similar something, again, to what they did with 7069. Put some really good stuff in with some really bad stuff.
Thank you. And I know that this board would probably be very interested in hearing more about that. Mrs. Andrews and I will be up in Tallahassee for FSBA February 7th to around the 9th. And so we should circle back with you and work on our priorities and also have you schedule some appointments for us. So perhaps we can work through individually or together with you, but we're going to need some appointments together. And we want to make sure we make the best use of our time. Thank you.
Definitely.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Thank you very much. Any other questions? Dr. Robinson.
Just a request, Mr. Watt, if you would include in your updates to the board in the future updates on the proposed planning money for the Black History Museum at Roosevelt, as well as the Riviera Beach Pre-K pilot that was filed under Early Learning Coalition.
Okay, not a problem. I will make sure to do that.
Okay, thank you very much. Stay warm up in Tallahassee.
Thank you, sir.
That concludes our committee reports. Next item are speakers, elected officials and delegations. We have, I believe, 3.